Data's Demon by Wright. I'm very much of two minds about the whole issue of data mining, as Lev Manovic puts it, or data recovery, as others might say, inasmuch as we have all contributed to that ever-expanding motherlode with which Renee Ridgway has invited us to engage in her recent thought-igniting post. The sheer magnitude of data accumulation is positively diabolical, or at least demonic, to use a more genteel term for the hellish little fellow. Indeed, in a fascinating, if somewhat sublime passage in his deliciously premonitory novel The Crying of Lot 49, written in the early 1960s, Thomas Pynchon imagines an ambivalent character whom I see as Data's demon. The demon passes his data on to the sensitive, and the sensitive must reply in kind. There are untold billions of molecules in that box. The demon collects data on each and every one. At some deep psychic level, he must get through. Then the sensitive must receive that staggering set of energies and feed back something, like the same quantity of information, to keep it all cycling. On the secular level, all we can see is one piston hopefully moving. One little movement against all that massive complex of information, destroyed over and over with each power stroke. That's some food for thought. Earlier I posted a response to Renee's text, enthusing about the potential of dynamic data displays applied to art critique. There has been discussion of the benefits of establishing a curatorial bank, even as banks are going bust all around us. More, more, more. Consider this drilling analogy. Community groups in some potentially oil-rich Latin American and West African countries are now demanding payment not to extract their oil, but to leave it be, in effect asking for payment for responsibly refusing to further carbon emissions, instead of jumping at the opportunity for petrol dollars and all that happiness they've brought. That's the more radical proposal for downsizing I know of. Can we apply it to data recovery? Should we? Ultimately, data recovery may prove to be a futile passion. This is surely the perspective of the millions of people who have tried, as opposed to the happy few who have managed. In contemporary society, data compiling has all the trappings of a passion, albeit a digitalized one, and an ever more intrinsic part of regimes of biopolitical control. In a sense, data has become the most all-pervasive and intangibly invasive feature of our lives. The proliferation of data-driven practices in the art world is merely an upshot of the spread of data gathering, display, and use in all walks of life become data. But can data, once lost, ever really be recovered? Can it be lured back into the vessel from which it escaped? Data can be covered over, buried beneath heaps of crunch numbers, but it is not obvious that it can be recuperated, if only because data, however reactive, is always a mere snapshot of a constantly morphing ensemble. Yet paradoxically, data never really goes away. It is insidiously enduring. Ironically, this raises an opposite question. Can life itself be recovered once reconfigured and redepicted by data? Can life in all its contradictory meanderings be uncovered once it has been covered over by ones and zeros? Life appears strangely frail in the face of implacable explanatory power of information, which seems to know life better than it knows itself. Perhaps data's greatest paradox is the staggering discrepancy between its substance and its performative power. In other words, between what it is and what it can do. Data merely provides a representation of what was, by definition, already there, of a state of affairs that was experientially available. Yet although it brings nothing new into the world, it has a paradoxically powerful ability to make things happen. The paradox stems from the fact that data is at once the very image of abstraction and somehow terribly concrete. Data merely makes quantifiable and thus perceptible was already there, providing a measurement of what people were living. Data stands in a curious grammatical relationship to its object. Even if produced in real time, data is always conjugated in the present, even as its reference is to some extent in the past, always already moving elsewhere. Think of pioneer sexologist Alfred Kinsey's infamous, when first released in the 1950s, report on sexual practices in America. Surely Americans knew what they were feeling and experiencing firsthand, no pun intended. Yet when their desires, fantasies, and practices were quantified and published in the wake of extensive interviews and careful data compilation, there was great hue and cry, as if the objectification of their subjectivity jarred their self-understanding and turned them into perverts in their own eyes. Such is data's strange and estranging power. This potential is of course a double-edged sword, for empirically data is value neutral, though empiricism itself may not be. It all depends on the use to which it is put. An artist like Trevor Paglen uses data compiling and presentation to great heuristic and subversive effects in laying bare the shadowy and often illegal operations of the United States military. One can be sure that the military, too, has been doing some compiling on their self-assigned compiler. Another way of stating that the same paradox is to point out that the data is never actually hidden, but out there, available, for anyone determined to sift through the reams of words and figures that drown the essential in a sea of trivia. Not only is the lived experience expressed by data embodied by those concerned, but even those facts that are ostensibly censored are often right in front of our eyes, like Edgar Allan Poe's Purloined Letter. This point was eloquently made in an extraordinary performance by Beirut-based artist Rabih Mrohi called "Looking for a Missing Employee," a story about the assassination of a Lebanese tax official with a case full of money, a true incident that became submerged in a flood of speculation, false reports, denial, and rumor. Sitting among the audience, a pile of newspaper clippings, his only source of information, Rabih Mrohi shows that the culprits and their motives are clearly designated in the press. As the performance develops, the artist sifts through the clippings, showing each one on an overhead projector as a corroborative piece of evidence. With the audience as his witness, he gives an eloquent lesson in factual recovery, recovering the truth from a glut of constantly reasserted uncertainty, idle speculation, and false leads that keep it hidden. The work was performed once in Beirut, then subsequently banned. Data recovery is against the law. It is perhaps trivial to suggest that too much data kills data, but it is clear that there is an economy of data transfer and management, which determines data's efficacy and subversive potential. Though data cannot necessarily be recovered, it can be transferred. But who controls the transfer point? Who is the demon sitting at the switch? To speak of a demon in this case is to think of Maxwell's famous thought experiment. If we conceive of a being whose faculties are so sharpened that he can follow every molecule in its course, such a being, whose attributes are are as essentially finite as our own, would be able to do what is impossible to us. For we have seen that molecules in a vessel full of air at uniform temperature are moving with velocities by no means uniform, though the mean velocity of any great number of them arbitrarily selected is almost exactly uniform. Now let's suppose that such a vessel is divided into two portions, A and B, by a division which there is a small hole, and that a being who can see the individual molecules opens and closes this hole, so as to allow the swifter molecules to pass from A to B, and only the slower molecules to pass from B to A. He will thus, without expenditure of work, raise the temperature of B and lower that of A, in contradiction with the second law of thermodynamics. Leaving aside the intricacies of the physics conundrum, we might, as Thomas Pynchon does in The Crying of Lot 49, imagine bits of data as standing in for molecules, ones and zeros in lieu of molecules A and B, and what we consider the demon operating the trapdoor without expenditure of work, as Maxwell oddly puts it, as a figure of the artist. The artist demon metes out the data to the sensitive in an act of non-work, who respond in kind. Data's gatekeeper in constant scrambling and reshuffling the cards of information, not in a vain attempt to recover what is lost, but rather to keep it all cycling. It is a tempting thought, but it only becomes persuasive today in light of the relations between art and data use in the course of modernity. Of course, life systems have been the object of sustained data gathering since the time of the Enlightenment. Cartography, flowcharts, graphs, and statistical databases have played a preponderant role in the shift from a society based on discipline to contemporary regimes of biopolitical control. But art historically, data-driven practices have been relatively rare. Indeed, what I have elsewhere called data aesthetics may be seen as a road untaken in the 20th century art practices. Art production long sought to protect the relatively autonomous sphere it had eked out for itself, and the incursion by the potentially deadening logic of knowledge production and data gathering and display. In the face of sheer glut and facile allure of purpose-driven information and rationality, art's self-assigned role was to affirm its radical uselessness. Yet, as knowledge use has become inseparable from the exercise of power, many practitioners have chosen to use the strength of data to challenge and potentially subvert data power. Critical cartography, tactical magic, database use, and all varieties of research have become integral components of artistic competence, which refuses to leave social critique to the social sciences.